I've got a couple of questions I'm going to run through with Jason and kind of help everyone understand how better to prepare themselves for the HR side and the employer side of being a business owner. So Jason Randall is the CEO of Questco, which is a PEO, which we'll talk more about in case people are wondering what PEO is. He's also the author of Beyond the Superhero, Executive Leadership for the Rest of Us. I worked with Jason previously in my past life, and he has a very broad background, right? He's led companies, he's managed within the PEO I came from, and now he's leading this PEO in striving for or achieving growth from what I read today, which is really cool. And so I'm going to let him do a quick rundown because he's got such a strong background and tell you a little bit about him. And then we'll dive right into the questions if that's okay, Jason.
That works great. Oh, so I'll just take it from there, Chelsea?
Yeah.
Perfect. Well, welcome everyone, live and in the recording. You know, people like you are very near to my heart. We're very much kindred spirits. You know, I've been hired twice as a CEO in existing and profitable businesses with the growth expectation following from that. So certainly the mandate that you have in front of you, perhaps one that you're putting on yourself, but a mandate nonetheless, is one that's really, really familiar to me. You know, currently I'm the CEO of Questco. We are private equity owned. We're a platform company and we make multiple acquisitions, have already made multiple acquisitions within our space. I was previously CEO of a company that was a three-time, award winner of, or had presence of the Inc. 500 list, because I'm old, and that was back when the list was only 500 companies and not 5,000. In that context, you know, as CEO, our organization grew our revenue from about $500,000 to around $30 million in around 5 years. So again, when I say we're kindred spirits, I think this is very similar to the sort of growth paths that you've envisioned for yourselves as you contemplate the purchase of your businesses. In terms of educational background, I got my MBA at Northwestern about 1,000 years ago. I'm also a CPA, so facile with the numbers as well as sort of the sizzle and telling the story. But I can tell the story is very much where I'd rather be. And you know, one more thing that I think really brings us together is that on the investing side, I'm very active, you know, across the private capital space, whether it's angel, VC, or private equity, invested in a number of funds as well as direct investments. And so again, I am interacting with entrepreneurs on a regular basis in my day job and on the weekends. So again, very, very thrilled to be here today. I have tremendous conviction around what you're doing and applaud you for taking these steps to really add value.
That's awesome. And it's probably been 8, I guess maybe 9 years since I first got introduced to the PEO space. And so just to give you an I guess a background on our members, I know I sent you the background, but just to frame this conversation. So most of our members are acquiring in like the $1 million to $7 million purchase price range. Many of them are buying a company with small numbers of employees. It could be 1, it could be 3, it could be none, it could be all independent contractors. It could be 50, right? And so they all have very different needs. And so many of them are going to be employers for the first time. And with that comes a lot of responsibility, which is when I typically will tell them to look into PEOs, right? And so would you mind just giving a quick overview of what PEO means and what that is? Because I started getting that question when I posted the topic. And I realized, I guess I know what that is now, but I didn't before. So maybe you could just give a quick overview.
Sure, Chelsea. It's an acronym that's getting more and more relevant as the years go on. So I'll start with a textbook definition, and then we'll kind of go into the beyond the textbook and sort of give you my personal impression as a longtime client of a PEO as well as an operator in this space. So yeah, if you research PEO, first of all, stands for, to get past the acronym, Professional Employer Organization. So we'll call them PEOs to shorten that mouthful. And you know, fundamentally what this is a comprehensive HR solution for small and mid-sized businesses. So there are functions you need to take on whether you want to or not as a business operator, and that's everything from payroll to employee benefits. It's workers' compensation. A PEO will handle all those services and also provide expert HR advice, safety services, HR technology platforms, and there can be a variety of other things depending on the specific PEO, talent acquisition services, for example, or advanced consulting services. So, you know, there's a sort of a colloquialism in our industry, which has about 500 PEOs, that if you learn about a PEO, you've learned about one PEO, because there are about 500 different ways to doing things. So discernment is an important part of this exercise. And you know, just a high-level benefit, because these functions, as it might imply, you know, managing people is tough. and the decisions around them are tough. And those that utilize a PEO solution make more money, they hold on to their people longer, and they're far less likely to go out of business. And these are very powerful proof points that have been demonstrated over decades that the industry, it's about a 40-year-old industry. So that's all textbook. But in terms of my own impression of what this industry is, I think might be a little more helpful. Is there really two components to it that differentiate it? Now, Chelsea, we might want to get into various flavors of HR services. But with the PEO, the first thing is the motivation might be similar to why you might join Costco or Sam's Club, that you're joining something larger than yourselves, and you're taking advantage of that larger entity's purchasing power to deliver economic value. So that's a good analogy when you're talking about joining something larger. You can benefit from our technology, our medical plans. You're not on a small group plan. You're joining a large group plan with thousands of participants. Likewise with the 401k, likewise with workers' compensation. And collectively, what's fascinating and unique about the PEO model is it can actually pay you to adopt it in certain cases, that there's enough hard cost savings relative to other options that actually funds all the rest of this value. And that's an exceptional concept to consider. And that's why some of those sort of high level proof points that I went over a moment ago are so provable and so compelling. So that's really one aspect of it, is the Costco thing. And the other thing that's really distinctive about the PEO model is the level of commitment. And because of a unique construct called shared employment or co-employment, the PEO that you join and become a client of actually assumes certain tangible risks. And because of that, it lessens your burden legally, and it also gives a PEO some skin in the game. So if you have a plate of bacon and eggs, the chicken is involved, but the pig is committed. And so we are in a situation where we are actually taking risk on ourselves, employment risk by virtue of serving you as a client, and that means that we can offer a deeper level of service with a much higher level of commitment over a great deal of time. So hopefully that answers it, Chelsea, in sort of the obvious and maybe non-intuitive ways.
Yeah, no, I think it does, and it kind of opens up to the next point, right? And I forget that I know. So to Jason's point, like one PEO, right? And I think Maurice Thomas, if anyone's familiar with him, who is a fellow member, talked about Insperity and being a member of Insperity. And so Insperity is the Cadillac, and so they offer a lot of things, which is in my mind what a PEO does, but it's not always the case. And so why don't we talk a little bit at a high level, Jason, about like what's the difference between a PEO and like a payroll provider like Paychex or like Gusto,
Sure.
Which we hear talked a lot about in the membership base?
I think it's a great question because it's such a confusing concept, right? A lot of the vocabulary is similar, so the services overlap. And that's intentional because frankly, there's some truth to that. And every company you named is awesome. I mean, they provide great value. There's a place for everyone, the same way that there's a place for Cadillac and there's a place for Chevy. But if you're hauling a big payload, you might need a truck and not a car, and vice versa. And I'll get off the analogies because I'm probably getting myself in trouble. But what's really important to notice around this thing is what question are you asking of this provider? What are you asking them to do? And so if you think of a continuum, on one side, on one extreme, there's what I would refer to as point solution support. So this is like, for example, payroll only services, or maybe just a technology provider or something like that. So they're doing one thing for you, and that's it. And they do a wonderful job of that. It might be payroll service and all the tax compliance associated with that. And that's what you're using them for. And if that's what you need, that's wonderful. Likewise, there are others, you sort of move up the value chain, and you have some that it's like, yes, we do that, and we will also add a technology platform, maybe we'll offer timekeeping, some other, in other words, we're gonna handle more of these issues that you have. But still, in these contexts, what you are really asking of the provider is, hey, help me do this myself. You're gonna do some of these things, you'll make it easier for me to run these functions myself. That can be wonderful. That can be exactly what you need. At very small numbers of employees, that's likely what you do need because your issues may not be complex enough to warrant any additional thing. So that's awesome, right? Where it gets confusing is when you think you're asking one question and asking another. For a service like a PEO, you're asking something entirely different. I would say in addition to help me do it myself because you're taking things over, you're actually changing the question a little bit to say, hey, augment my actual team and help me offload tasks, reduce my administrative burden by removing it and adding to my team. So that's when we get into the PEO concept and an allied concept called an ASO, or administrative service organization, where you're actually augmenting the team as opposed to just getting a point solution or a set of point solutions that help you do things more efficiently. There may be some follow-up that's helpful there too, Chelsea. So, how can we sort of expand on that further? Yeah, so basically you can, again, there are a lot of ways to charge as a PEO. It can be really confusing. So I'll just separate it into two easy buckets just to make it simple. The direct fees charged for administrative services, administrative service fee, and then the direct cost of things like benefits and allocation for things like that. What you can reasonably expect is that the service fees of a PEO are going to be more expensive, often substantially more expensive, than if you hire a payroll-only provider. The thing that's interesting about this is with a PEO, for example, if you're offering medical benefits, let's say you buy an organization that offers medical benefits now. The PEO, under the PEO, you can join their master medical plan should they offer such a thing. And I think it's a key attribute for many businesses that they do. And there could be enough hard cost savings in that medical plan that will more than offset the cost difference relative to the payroll provider. That's awesome, because very few car washes will let you wash the car and pay you for the privilege, right? But in our business, that does happen. It doesn't always happen. And then the rest of the question, I think, is a very, very astute one, is, well, yes, it will cost more, and you're beyond the risk factor, you're also getting more. You're getting live HR human beings to help you through issues. You're getting a human being team and not just a technology or just a point solution service.
And I think that's the point of clarification. So when we say, I think a lot of times, and I say this as somebody that's spoken on behalf of a PEO, right? I think there's an assumption that business owners know what HR solutions are, right? Or even what goes into HR administration, or, right? And so one of the biggest things that I can tell you guys as lab members, the case for bringing on a PEO just made sense when it came to growing. So anytime I was talking about acquisitions, it just literally makes sense for you to leverage a PEO because, and this goes into my next question, of what they can do for a business that's looking to grow, right? And the infrastructure and the support that they provide. And so, Jason, can you, like, as a business owner, give them some perspective of what we mean with what they actually will do? Like, as detailed as you can, because I do feel like when we get speakers, and sometimes we all stay at like the level of professional knowledge we have, forgetting that not everybody has that context. So break it down like we're all third graders.
Sure. So a couple different contexts, right? First of all, there's sort of a day-to-day steady state operation. May we all be so lucky that a typical week in the business has nothing dramatic happen. But just steady state running. What you can expect is, again, payroll service, benefits administration. This is a big one I think a lot of people overlook. That is, if you are buying a small business and you're sponsoring your own small group medical, anytime an employee has any question about the medical plan, they're going to be coming to you first. And almost all of the time, you're not going to know the answer to that question. You're going to have to rely on perhaps an insurance broker to do this. Maybe the insurance broker for a fee will handle some of these questions, but it's not really what they're set up to do. So just focusing on one area, steady state, an employee gives birth, has to go out on maternity leave, is sick, whatever the sort of day-to-day thing is in a normal steady sort of week, a PEO will have a skilled resource, a licensed resource, in our case, a licensed resource, to walk you through that issue, walk the employee through that issue, so you do not be directly involved at all. And that's a way better place to be, because ultimately it's about leveraging your time or the time of your team. One of the questions you need to ask yourself is this where I need to be spending my time for maximum economic and personal impact? And answering point questions on your benefit plans may not be it. So that's just sort of on the steady state week. That's sort of, how does it work? You're going to run payroll and have help doing that. You're going to have the day-to-day things to help doing that. You're going to have access to an HR technology. So if an employee wants to change their withholding, make some sort of interaction, enroll in a 401k plan. This can all be done without any involvement whatsoever from the business owner. And that right there is pretty awesome, because not only does it leverage your time, from the point of view of your employees, you're actually adding to their experience. You're enhancing it, because they're more empowered, they have more options of what to do, and they're going to get more responsive service than you could possibly provide given your day jobs, right? And by you, I mean, the team as a whole. So that's sort of a normal week. And Chelsea, I'll stop there and see if there are any questions, and then let's talk about the other stuff, right? Certain things could be like the way that a technology looks might be something that's possible to white label, sort of depends on the specifics. But the crux of the question, the answer is probably not. And something like, for just one very specific example, the PEO's corporate name goes on the paycheck. That is an absolute must have. It's essential to the business model. The PEO pays the employees. So inside of a white label concept where that if it's imperative that that involvement stays hidden, it won't be hidden. Likewise, the legal sponsor of all these plans and so on. So I would say there's some light white labeling that's possible, but it's probably not the answer if you're looking for a full, this firm should be invisible in the background. Just not possible legally to do that.
My question is really around if someone is trying to decide, like maybe they have 3 1099 people at the company that they're buying. You know what? Put a pin in it. Keep going.
Okay.
I'm gonna open it up later.
Sure. And keep in mind this issue that you're raising by reference, 1099s. One of the things that will make a cringe at anyone that's involved in this space is when we hear someone brag about their 1099 employees, right? That's not a thing. You're an independent contractor, you're an employee, and a way a lot of small businesses really run afoul in a material way is misclassification along wage and hour lines. The consequences of this are massive. They're not well understood, and this is the kind of thing that a PEO can help with is classification. Otherwise, the next likely place to go is an employment attorney that costs several $100s an hour to help you sort this out. But I would caution any of you that are reliant on a model or contemplating a model that has the heavy use of contractors, get that examined by someone that knows, because this is a very serious, possibly existential issue to a business potentially. This is a point that's often, I would say, misunderstood even by people in our industry. So I'll give it, hopefully I'm not going to take too much time on this, but I think it's important to understand. If you have a 10,000 employee organization, you don't necessarily have better medical pricing than a 20-person organization if your 10,000 person organization is sicker than the 20-person organization, right? Ultimately, insurance is a function not merely of size, but of risk. But what is the case is a similarly situated group will have not only the benefits of likely better pricing due to the efficiency of the plans. With a PEO, you will have those sort of scale advantages inherent in plan efficiency. That does matter, especially at the scales we're talking about. But you also have things that are qualitatively incredibly important. We have a direct line to United Healthcare by virtue of being a very important customer to them in a way that no small group could ever hope to have. It doesn't mean that we're going to get your transplant approved when it's denied. But what it does mean is we have resources internal and at UHC to help solve some issues and work through some challenges that are very daunting for the small group. And this is a really key advantage. The other way this comes into play in terms of scale, the Costco end of the PEO value prop, is in, like, for example, in a medical plan for a small group, it would be unusual for you to be offered by a local broker more than a very small number of medical plan options for your people. And this can be really problematic in certain employee populations. Let's say, for example, you have some relatively low wage people and some relatively high wage people, as is really quite common in certain contexts. You may have to pick plans that don't really serve many people very well because they have to choose to be kind of skinny on the insurance coverage or very, very rich. And maybe it moves it out of the realm of affordability. With a PEO, our relationship allows you to choose among literally over a dozen different plan options. You can offer several to your employees. So if you have 7 people that work for your company that are taking medical, they can choose among, say, 4 different plans, and you're much more likely to get a right fit. And that is accomplishable through the model. So I know that's a little beyond maybe what you bargained for, but I think it's important to get out all of the scale benefits beyond just cost. If it's that we're bigger, so we're going to save you on medical, it's like, well, maybe. I mean, that absolutely does happen, but it's not just a function of size. Another thing I would point out is that our underwriting is incredibly sophisticated, and that is also something that can be very helpful to a potential client. That gets in the weeds a little bit, but for a number of reasons, it's at least worth investigating when it comes to medical benefits. Is this a better avenue to go? Because there could be some substantial savings over your other options. most businesses can potentially be a fit. The ones that, if your business skews to very heavy turnover type businesses that don't particularly place a value on an individual employee, in other words, you don't want to invest a lot in medical, and that can be challenging. That said, we do have chain fast food restaurants as current clients, so it's hard to make the blanket statement. I will say the one absolute that makes it a really poor fit are people that want to play fast and loose with the law. And I don't mean this in like a derisive way, like, oh my gosh, you're automatically a criminal, but someone that has that is willing to roll the dice a little bit, saying, yeah, I don't think I'm going to classify these people as employees, to bring up the example from before, or I think this person really is a salaried person, even though you're telling me they're hourly. In other words, people that won't follow expert advice on things like that, and there are more of them than you might assume. That's a really poor fit for the model, because our first and foremost responsibility is to keep you safe in the eyes of the law. And so if someone doesn't want to do that, it's a terrible philosophical fit. I would also say very, very small groups. If you're just a couple of employees or no employees, and you're not intending to grow that, which I don't believe are people on this call, it's just sort of, it's not like it's bad. It's just more like it's a lot of, it's more than you would need from an HR perspective. So it's probably not a bad fit. It's a bad fit economically at that point, because you wouldn't qualify for a lot of the group programs that we offer and things like, or that a PEO offers. So other than that, industry-wide, there's someone that will take it. If you buy an over-the-road trucking company, there are many PEOs that will reject you out of hand, but there are PEOs that specialize in it. Other than that, it's extremely niche. People that manufacture pallets, people that do underwater welding. So I don't think I'm going to hit on the sweet spot of the group and the businesses you're looking for. There are certain categories that are very, very difficult, but within our client base, we have, again, fast food restaurants. We have large public companies that are clients. So there's a huge range of people that choose to work with us and choose to work with PEOs more generally.
When a company is growing, so let's say some of our members do have 3 employees or 2 employees. So at what point of number of employees do you cross the threshold for it being a decent thing to explore?
This is a hard question to give a boilerplate answer to. So the logical answer is talk to folks, right? There are some PEOs that literally won't give you the time of day if you don't have at least 10 employees currently. Others have a more flexible sort of mindset about that. Again, I would say if you're 3 employees, always going to be 3 employees, this is probably not the conversation for you. If you have 3 employees, but you will soon be larger, it's probably the best fit you could possibly imagine to join with the PEO. I'll just give you one handy example from our own client base. As a company that got venture funding, they started off with just the founders, 2 people. But it's an awesome concept. It's a combination of a dog park and a bar. They're on the East Coast. Phenomenal. So first location, 40 employees added. Next location, another 40. And they're going to put 10 more locations out this year. So we're not going to look at Questco, at least, at the 2 employees. We're going to look at what the business plan is and how we grow together. So that's just a good example of, it's important to talk to the individual providers, because what might be really out of the wheelhouse for some is embraced by others. And if this is compelling to you, talk through the situation with a few, and I think you'll find someone that can fit. This is an absolutely outstanding question, and I think good for the group to know. A PEO will need around 45 days to onboard you as a new client, right? And maybe it can be a little less, maybe a little more. It sort of depends on the exact services you're picking up, but allow for this in the plan. A transition period. And the answer is yes, there can be a PEO that's ready to accept those employees. There can be an arrangement to accept those employees day one, but a lot depends on the specifics. And it's really important that the entity is formed and existing as opposed to be set up. In other words, the PEO has to attach to an existing entity as opposed to one to be created, just by virtue of the way our CSA works.
I think that's actually a common question, Jason, is like our members, again, these aren't HR people, these are business owners, and understanding on day one what has to happen from it, like what are all the pieces that have to get connected from an HR perspective. That's one of the reasons why, I've brought up PEOs, as PEOs HR is complicated, and,
Sure.
and there's a lot of T's to cross, I's to dot. Okay, I got it right.
Right.
And so having a PEO is somebody that knows those things. And so what's the right point to start talking to a PEO if, let's say, you're thinking about acquiring a company, with employees,
This is
over
actually a
10?
place where a slide may be helpful. So if you don't mind, let me actually put a visual up to sort of show
Yeah,
you
please.
what we're dealing with here. So hopefully you can see my screen. I'll go ahead and put it in slideshow mode to make it more visible. But basically there are distinct phases to this. And this is, of course, what happens once you've made the decision to join the PEO. Even before this point, there's a bunch of, there's sort of the introductory conversations to be had. There's also an underwriting process that has to go on should you be interested in a medical plan. And there is an underwriting process that has to go on the workers' comp side regardless, with no exceptions. Even in Texas, it doesn't require workers' comp. We do. So we have to, qualify you from a workers' comp point of view and get that priced. So allow for some time in the sales process. In other words, to get a fully priced proposal. That's largely dependent on you, but it can be a couple of weeks for that, from the time you say, yes, I'm interested, to you actually get your fully costed proposal and are able to sign an agreement to move forward. Once that happens, that's where the slide kind of picks in and all the steps that have to happen. I don't think we want to go over every step other than to impress upon our audience, look how many steps there actually are, right? There's a lot of detail here. There's a technology integration that has to occur. And again, we don't charge a lot for it. We're not Workday or Ultimate Software where you have this big software fee. There's a relatively modest implementation fee, generally with the PEO. But all these things must happen to become a PEO client. So the biggest thing I can say is this is not something to wait on or to assume you can rush, because to the extent we rush this process, your employees have more issues, and that boomerangs right back to your desk in terms of the reasons among the motivations to explore a concept like that is to relieve your burden. Well, you're going to have more burden if we don't take the time to do this right. So I would allow 45 days from the time the CSA is signed to the first payroll is run. And that doesn't mean 45 days of doing nothing. There's a whole lot that goes on. And there are a couple things people tend to forget, is that a first payroll is paid by the PEO, but it's accrued several weeks before that hand, depending on your pay cycles and so on. So the actual accrual and responsibility will be backed up significantly. For all these reasons, go ahead and allow ample time if you possibly can, and let's do this right and get it done well. Another analogy I love to give at this point is, even in the best circumstances, think of it like if you're moving cross country, you can be the best organized person, and still the move will have some hassle, it will have some unexpected twists and turns, and it can be a little frustrating at times. This is a major central spine decision for your business, and we dedicate tremendous resources for the new client transition to go smoothly. Any good PEO will do so as well. Some do not, most do. That said, remember why you're moving in the first place. You're acquiring great benefits. It's for a brighter future. And so don't sweat the day-to-day small errors. What's good about a high-quality PEO is that we or they will stand with you, fix errors quickly, communicate well, and get you through sort of a once every rare time horizon kind of event. And we do it every single day. So hopefully that's helpful. I'll stop sharing now, unless there are any questions about this specifically. This is not a PEO-centric issue. This is just how payroll works, right? Let's say your pay date is the 15th of the month. The pay date on the 15th will likely cover, I'll just pick it at random. Let's say from the 27th of the previous month to the 10th of the current month, right? That's the pay period at question. So the accrual starts on the 27th, and then it runs through the 10th, and then the processing happens to enable the check or direct deposit to be issued on the 15th. That's what we're talking about with these time lags. They're actually less than they appear because you have to, you're actually earning before you're paid. You're actually, you're obliquely referencing a very common question, Saskia, that we get all the time, which is, oh, this is going to be confusing or weird for my people. The check will say, Questco or Insperity, but I'm ABC widgets. Isn't that going to suck for them? No, it will not. The way that we work together in a healthy basis is to say, hey, we've partnered with Questco to enhance our operations and your experience. And so the way this works is the check comes from it might be an entity of Questco or something like that. And this is just us working together. As long as the communication is clear, it's never an issue. A lot of business owners expect it to be an issue. It is literally never an issue, and something that we love to address, because generally your people are delighted by this decision. So the way that this works, what enables us to offer to you as a client our large medical plans, our workers' compensation, you're joining something larger. Your employees are legal employees of Questco, but they're under the direction and control of you as the business owner. So we issue the W-2 tax forms. So again, totally off your plate, but it comes from, say Questco, not from ABC Widgets. But you have all the control. So you have all the benefit of being an employer with none of the hassle. And when you think about it, this isn't night and day different from a non-PEO relationship in the context. If you work for a large company, say ADP processes the payroll. ADP is issuing that W-2. It comes from ADP. It might have the employer name on it. These are relatively small differences, but important for you to understand. It is different than just hiring a payroll service. You're actually partnering with an organization that has legal responsibility to pay your people. In other words, a PEO has to pay your people even if you don't. That's what I'm talking about, the shared liability concept. A PEO may or may not be able to enable that through their systems. It doesn't preclude you from offering such an arrangement. Any decision you want to make with regard to your culture, your compensation, within the bounds of the law, are enabled through a PEO will not prohibit you from doing that. That is absolutely your decision and yours alone to make.
So can I ask about the strategic side? So I heard you say that we don't all know. So all PEOs, some PEOs, a few PEOs may offer consulting services as part of their service, or this like kind of additional level of support, for lack of better words, guys. How common is that, number one? And does Questco provide that? And what does that look like?
Well, thanks for reminding, Chelsea. We actually started on the everyday situation, then we were going to talk about the exceptional situation. We never got back to that. So probably a good dovetail back to that concept. So the everyday situation, people are changing benefits elections, they're, these kinds of things. But what happens if an employee gets hurt at work? What happens if someone quits under less than ideal circumstances and are threatening a lawsuit? In other words, these issues that happen every once in a while, but across your business experience, will happen at some point to you. What do? That's where a PEO has, in contrast to like hiring a point solution provider, a PEO has human beings. In our case, you can access someone with decades of experience handling similar issues to talk you through options and what to do. Oh my gosh, someone is, I just got something on my desk from the EEOC, or someone is quitting and they're alleging sexual harassment on the way out the door. Very serious things, obviously emotionally upsetting, but also practically huge time sucks. That's where a PEO can be a great partner to you. So that this responsive level of service, this will differ among PEOs, what they are skilled in. And that's important to really vet out, as you're evaluating different providers, how much they have invested in that, what are the credentials of their people. And that's a really important aspect of the business. Then there's another level that's not based on something bad happening or something to react to. It's something good happening. Hey, we're contemplating an acquisition and we're in Missouri and it's a New Mexico company. I don't know anything about New Mexico law or what's going on. Can you help me through some of the issues there and some things to think about? That's where some PEOs will be expert in helping and some maybe less so. And I think it's an important part of the tale there. Likewise, I think what Chelsea, you might also be referring to is there are other services like, hey, help me understand if I'm paying my people fairly and in line with the market. Help me understand if my HR strategy is fundamentally sound, and I'm not sure the morale of my team, things like that. And again, different PEOs will have different sensibilities around and capabilities around the services they offer. Our own philosophy around services like this is we have access to a lot of stuff like this, but we don't bake it into the admin fees that we charge in many cases. Certain things like a rudimentary compensation study will be fee inclusive. There are other things we don't feel like all of our clients should pay for, things that only a few clients need on a rare basis. So if you want some other, you want help developing a strategic plan, we can get you there, and you would pay for that as an incremental charge, because we don't want to you don't want to pay for that forever when you use it one time or once every 2 years or so on. But some PEOs are not able to do that at all. And so it's important to know, if that's important to you, that you're asking those questions up front, so that you avoid a surprise later. Likewise, another big thing, especially right now, is I don't think we're, if you've picked up if you've listened to the media at all, you know that the talent market is pretty tight. So acquiring talent and doing the physical work around that, sourcing, are things that different PEOs have both different capabilities and different strategies around. In our individual case, we have a service that provides talent sourcing at rates that are, 50 to 80% less expensive than hiring a third-party recruiter on your own. If you want that, or if you just want access to an applicant tracking system and doing that work yourself. Again, we're not going to make you pay for something you don't use, so that's also available. So what you're seeing, hopefully not confusing the room too much, but what you're seeing is there's a lot of permutations, flexibility, because HR decisions are complicated and rangy. And so our business model as a provider reflects that variation of sensibilities. Others have more of a one-size-fits-all approach, and it just matters. There's no bad answer. It's just what's right for your situation.
And you raise a good point that I think is worth digging into, that I think is even more complicated, is that PEOs charge differently. And so can you give people an idea of like the different payment structures that different PEOs might offer?
Oh, sure. So obviously the amount you're charged, this can be a very confusing topic, all right? Because there, we already touched on, there's the fee that the PEO charges for its professional services, and then there are the hard costs of benefits and so on. So a PEO invoice can be a rather complicated, even intimidating thing. What's really important when I'm in your shoes is to get it itemized. There are PEOs that tend to sort of bundle it all together. In the extreme example, you can see situations where they bundle it all and then express it as a percentage of payroll. So it's almost like a derivative of a derivative. Okay, so I'm paying 10.27% of payroll. I encourage you to try to contextualize that in any other sense. And that's a lot of PEOs that specialize in blue collar or sort of old school PEOs will prefer to charge that way. We, along with many others, prefer more of a per employee per month model for professional charges with absolutely everything itemized. So there's no ambiguity around this. So I can't speak for every provider in the industry, right? Because there are different sensibilities. As a general rule, with PEOs, and certainly our PEO, we're not going to tell you what to do. That's your decision. What we're going to do is we're going to outline the consequences of it. And I would say within reasons. If you want to do something that's clearly against the law, you can still do it. We might just term you as a client because, again, we have some risk there, and you're going to have to go your own way. So there is no situation where you can't do what you want with a PEO relationship. It may just end the relationship. That's rare, right? Usually what happens is, well, here's sort of a range of options. Here's the risk of each, and it's your call. And I think better PEOs will also say, and here's what we recommend, balancing the factors, right? Some will just say, here are the options. It's up to you. I'll shrug my shoulders after that. So I think what you're hearing from me that should be extremely comforting is no PEO is going to force you to run your business in a way that's both legal and against your wishes. That won't happen. The other is that ultimately you should be given a range of options and be able to make more informed decisions at a far lower cost and a greater or client friendliness than if you're going to an outside legal counsel to get the same kind of answer. This is incredibly challenging to give an answer across PEOs again, but most PEOs will have some sort of provision for training, and it can be a mix of live and in person, recorded, and virtually live. So the short answer is, if this is important to you, you can absolutely find a provider that can meet that need. Not every provider will be able to do it in the form and fashion. And I think what the pandemic has taught us is the move to virtual is preferred a lot of times, that we would have done it in person before, which is, I think, good for everyone. So short answer, yeah, and you can find exactly what you're looking for. And keep in mind, not all PEOs operate in all states, right? And for those that aren't familiar with this world, California is almost its own country when it comes to labor law. Yeah. So there are a lot of PEOs that, love you, but I'm not going to go to California. Among the reasons, just, fun fact, in California, if you terminate someone, you need to put a paycheck in their hand at that moment. right? So obviously that takes a lot of infrastructure to do that if you're based halfway across the country and don't have a physical presence. So all these kind of things are baked into the cake. Bottom line is a lot of good providers and a lot of good options, to pursue.
Jason, you just raised one of the most common reasons I push people to explore either outsourced HR where they'll have a knowledge partner is just the nuance of when to cut a paycheck. Like you just don't know that these things matter. Like we had a member who bought a company and had lots of HR issues right away. He had an employee drunk on the floor, didn't really know how best to handle that from a legal perspective, how to terminate an employee and what because again, there are federal, state, local, municipal, there's just all kinds of layers of legal things that you need to be aware of. And so relying on a HR expert is always in your best interest, whatever that looks like, whether that's PEO or an HR solution, like Jason mentioned.
Yeah, it's not always about worst case situations either, Chelsea. It can just be, this is more. It's not the end of the world, but do I want to be spending my time dealing with the guy that's asleep on the shop floor or whatever? I need some help here, so I don't have to be worrying about this all day. That's what a outsourced service provider can help with. It's a little hard to answer this one also in the generic, but I will say is let's not misinterpret that a PEO replaces an employment lawyer in every context. For example, if you need to produce some paper around an employment contract and it's highly specific to a senior executive or something, that is a role for an employment attorney. And so PEOs can maybe provide preferred pricing for employment attorneys, but they don't necessarily replace it in all instances. The point that I think is far more common and important to really emphasize is that a lot of times small businesses will use attorneys when they should be using professional HR advice because they don't have access to HR advice. They only have access to attorneys, and that's very dear and costly. So there are certain things, a handbook, for example, included with every PEO service is a fundamental aspect. And it sounds bureaucratic. In fact, it's the rules of the road of how to conduct yourself as an employee. It's a vital document that can be misunderstood. That is part and parcel. You don't need an attorney for that. Likewise, a lot of garden variety employee relations issues are expertly handled by the PEO. When you're sued and need to have a legal response to that, the PEO is not going to replace an attorney in that case, but they can work with you to minimize the legal burden by doing some of the work that doesn't need to be done by attorneys, and also, depending on the PEO, have relationships that can give you preferred pricing and more familiarity and things that will just save you time and money.
So let's just use 1099 is a big deal, and it's one of the biggest reasons I bring up to our members to have somebody help them with due diligence, right? Is to ensure that 1099 workforce, because we see it all the time, is actually accurately classified. And so we'll have them do it. And I just got a call from a member who closed last month, and he's like, so I know that you told me to look at this beforehand, and we did, but I think they're wrong. I think these might be employees. I'm like, okay. So now moving to that, let's assume that they are employees and they've been wrongly classified. Number one, what are the implications of that? And number two, what if they are in the Philippines? And do you have to get rid of these contractors, or can you hire these Filipino citizens as your employees? And you don't have to give like specifics, but is that even an option at that point?
Okay, some of this gets really esoteric and beyond my actual expertise. I can certainly talk in a general sense to what happens when you have people misclassified as a non-employee when they in fact are. It's, as Chelsea mentions, among the most common things. I'd say almost ubiquitous if somebody has not worked with a PEO before or is buying, there's a lot of playing fast and loose with this. You know what? You might not get caught. The fact is, if you do get caught, it can be tremendously disruptive. And if you didn't do an asset purchase, you just assume this organization, it can potentially be existential because the penalty, it depends if it's willful or if it's just more of a clerical thing. But the bottom line is, in some form or fashion, it's very tempting to classify people as independent contractors. It's cheaper, whatever, but there's a very detailed sort of qualification for that. And if they're working only for you, you're providing materials and workspace, you're directing hours and means of labor, and probably about 20 other things, they're likely to be an employee. And then you're misclassified. So what happens? Well, at a minimum, there are literal back pay implications to the employee and the taxing authority. You know, because they weren't pay. You were responsible for employer FICA. You were responsible for federal and state unemployment. You were responsible for workers' compensation. All these things that didn't get paid, they'll come after you for a lot of that. And then the extent to which it's punitive depends on exactly what the practices were. So you can be inheriting a big mess. I would say if you were looking at buying a business that has this as a fundamental part of your model, you should make this a fundamental part of diligence, which I think is what you just referred to, Chelsea, because it could be even a walkaway situation depending on exactly what the mess is, or you might want to structure the transaction differently. But if you remember nothing else about this question, it is not in your best interest to roll the dice with regard to wage and hour and job role misclassification. It is an absolute nightmare if you're there. So please take that seriously and get the guidance you need to classify people correctly.
Because I think you kind of hit on it even more than I expected, in the sense of like, it's not the likelihood of you getting caught. You're a business this big, you may not get caught. However, your hands are going to be tied because it's a small business, and the chances of your financial models accounting for all of the taxes and implications and the costs associated with becoming an employer, that if you did want to actually correct it, it would either significantly, negatively impact the bottom line, or it could tank your business altogether. So it's like, if you get in this situation, you could actually have your hands tied to not be able to fix it, right? And then the risk is still there that somebody can rat you out.
Yeah,
right?
well,
you piss somebody off, they can report you.
That's how it happens. It's not like there are entities that are out there scouring the universe for wage and hour violations. That happens if someone's disgruntled, they make a complaint, and that can go to any one of a number of authorities. But once the complaint happens, it's not about that one employee. It's about all the employees, whether they're current or not. And then once that starts, it becomes the center of your universe, because the penalties can be massive. And if it was pervasive and intentional in the eyes of the authorities, you're looking at very, very severe penalties.
All right. What do you think, as our members are thinking about, so they acquire a business, many of our members are thinking about multiple acquisitions, right? They're going to grow the business through acquisition, most likely.
Right.
And so what do you think of, I guess, two questions, regardless of your growth strategy, right? Either, organic growth or through acquisition. If you're planning on scaling, how do our members decide if they should build an HR function, right? Or outsource the HR function to either, vendors or a PEO? Like, what's the thought process that they should be thinking about?
Yeah, so we'll set aside the acquisition conversation entirely for the moment and just say, well, hey, should I even contemplate this kind of thing? And it comes really two fundamental questions you have to ask yourself. First of all, is this the best use of my time? Maybe not. Generally not. I don't find a lot of people in the situation of the entrepreneurial acquisition model to be those that really want to focus on this area of the business. And again, we're talking about HR administration, benefits, compliance. We're not talking about building a culture, things like that. That's yours, right? But in terms of enabling this, supporting your people, selecting benefits programs, do I want to be spending time there? I think the vast majority of the time, that answer should be no. And even if yes, it's, well, and am I any good at this? Do I have the specific skills involved across the skill set? Or does somebody on the team already have this in sufficient scale for my ambitions? And keep in mind, PEOs and outsourced HR organizations generally can work very well with an existing team. That is not a challenge. And in fact, let's say you buy a company that has someone that's been handling HR. Somebody's been doing something, right? All these years. That's not necessarily a threat. In fact, it can be the biggest blessing they've ever received to get more support, because what you find in a lot of small businesses is one of two situations. First of all, you kind of find the unarmed warrior, where somebody, you hire somebody that really knows their stuff with HR, and that takes 125% of the budget for HR in this function, and then they're left with no money to really implement all the great ideas they might have to move the business forward. Not fun. We can help with that. And the other thing is that you hire someone that knows next to nothing of HR, but again, they just picked it up and thanks, Scott. I've enjoyed our talk today.
Thank you, Jason.
They just, this was sort of thrust upon them. It happens a lot with finance people at the more senior level. And the arms and legs level, the most extreme example I've seen of this is a company that had about 140 employees, where the 23-year-old receptionist was handling new employee onboarding and benefits conversations with every employee. Is that the best employee experience that leads to the best outcomes for your people to have that? Probably not. So again, existing resources could be supplemented by an outside provider and everybody wins. So really, in the agnostic, forget any expansion, forget any acquisitions. Is this the best way to go about it? And that's why it's like, hey, a provider can do everything from help me be more efficient in doing this myself, maybe the right answer, to, hey, this isn't for me. I want to offload a lot of this and gain some of the benefits. I believe for any business under 50 employees, at an absolute minimum, you owe it to yourselves to look into the concept. And maybe it's not for you at the end of the day, but at least examine it, because it's such a source of competitive advantages relative to those that take their own chances with this and just try to sort of wing it, on the fly.
I think you're spot on. And I ran into that. I can't tell you how many times consulting, right? Like what happens is the natural evolution of the business, right? And that's what our members are going to be experiencing. And a lot of times HR is handed off to office managers or receptionists or the finance person, and they don't actually have HR knowledge, and that can get you into trouble. What bothers me is when they start relying on the internet. So like I had a client who ordered a handbook off the internet, as well as all kinds of other policies, right? But they ordered an employee handbook off of like policies-in-a-box.com, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I was brought in because they were joining the PEO and we were doing a compliance audit. And they had been offering in writing to every employee a year's maternity leave, 1 year's paid maternity leave. They were offering tuition reimbursement. They were offering these absurd things. Well, what happens was they bought a European package and didn't realize that the company, it was actually European policies. My favorite thing is that our contact was a new mother. So the HR person had just came back from maternity leave, right? And I was like, you do realize you could have had a whole year. Nobody had read the handbook, right? They just bought something off the internet. And so there are things that I think that people undervalue that an HR service can support. And so that's kind of my next question is like, you mentioned that at 50 employees, you should be thinking about a PEO just to examine if it's an option for you. And so the same question goes to, at what point do you think you need to bring in-house someone that knows something about HR?
It very much depends on the goals of the business, of course. We have clients that are several hundred employees and they're very happy with this model, and I don't see any end in sight. I see others that get to 75 employees and think that they've outgrown it. A lot of times they think they've outgrown it well before they have. What I would say is, at a minimum, think about the cost to replace the function on your own, all things considered. And that's a spreadsheet exercise. And then there's a prioritization exercise of, is it making that investment the right call? This is obviously an excellent question. Rule of thumb, the heart and soul of businesses served by this model are 10 to 100 employees. That should tell you, if it's below 10, it may be more niche, like a fast growing company or things like that to take advantage. I would say that, below 5, it's an extreme niche, meaning that you're intending to grow into that size. And if you're over 100, again, it starts to be like, well, let's really take a look at that. In between sort of depends on sensibilities. And keep in mind, we're talking about hundreds of providers. There are a lot of different sensibilities out there on the provider side that maybe if you feel like you've outgrown one PEO, doesn't mean you've outgrown a PEO, the same way you might outgrow a legal firm or a CPA firm. So different capabilities out there. So phenomenal question. I wish I could give a boilerplate answer. I would say that we have very happy clients as an industry to very large sizes. So you don't need to worry about, in the abstract, outgrowing this model because you're contemplating fast growth. It's all about getting the providers that are right for you.
No, and I think that to add to that, if you feel like you're too small for a PEO, it does not mean you are too small for HR.
Right.
Like you may still need to bring someone. So my experience is, from an employment perspective, depending on your state, like Jason, I can't give flat answers because every state differs, but there are federal requirements that you're subject to at certain sizes, right? And so you need someone there that actually knows these things and knows how to be in compliance. And so once you get to a point of, I would say, you think you're even going to cross that 10, getting up into 25, you're going to be doing yourself a disservice to either not talk to a PEO and not have, like, if you're not going to talk to PEO, you're like, I'm not doing that until I get to 50 people. At least bring somebody in that knows something about HR, even if it's a part-time person or an external partner, because HR is complicated. It really is. I don't know why people don't think it is. It's not, it just is.
Sure, there's a lot to it. And I would say at 10, you are a wonderful fit for outsourced HR of some permutation. And I would say even at 5 employees, you're a great fit for some point solutions that can give you at least some relief. This is not the kind of thing to go on your own any more than giving yourself a root canal or a surgery. It is that complicated and potentially that painful.
Oh, I love that. How does a PEO help in an acquisition?
So it's such a, I mean, it's an amazing question because there are a couple different contexts. I want to give sort of the generic M&A context. I want to speak also to the entrepreneurial acquisition model, right? Because I think what's attracted your clientele or your ecosystem to this is that, hey, through entrepreneurial acquisition, we can have a smarter way to business growth, right? Likewise, this is a smarter way to business growth within the concept. So again, the kind of people that this organization attracts are hand in glove perfect, and nowhere is that better than acquisition. So, excuse me. So first of all, generic acquisitions. And we can even start, not even a business acquisition, but an employee acquisition. It can be a pretty big inhibition if you're say based in one state and say the center of a large state, and then suddenly you want to make a hire in another state, an individual employee hire. And now with virtual employee becoming much more of a thing that happens and even an expectation in certain contexts, this is more common than ever. Well, if you're based entirely in say Texas, and now there's a great person you want to hire in Illinois, oh boy. So now I have to register in that state. I have to figure out what to do about benefits in that state. Medical plans are generally state specific. So then you're going to have an potential equity issue between what you're offering in Illinois to one person and what you offer the rest of the organization. A whole bunch of other stuff in terms of how to handle the varying laws of that state. So all these things sort of factor in. With a PEO relationship, stroke of a pen, it's just done. You hire the person. The PEO handles all the complexity in that. We, just again, to bring up our own situation, we have around 1,000 clients. We're in nearly every state in the union. And so adding a new employee becomes literally just a notification that they're hired. And that's a radical difference in terms of speed. You can just make offers more quickly. You can get them onboarded more quickly. And that's to say nothing of the actual service provided to do it, which is, I would say, another advantage. So the legal and administrative burden is dramatically lowered when you're with a PEO and crossing state lines, especially during expansion. And then you take that to a business acquisition, you're one business acquiring another in some form or fashion, even more so, because you have all these things that then if you're making an asset purchase, you can roll over into these plans, no problem. In our individual case, our medical plan is nationwide. So everybody can be offered the same thing day one. You don't have to worry about these issues of mismatched plans and mismatched benefits. It's literally just a benefit of the service, an advantage of the service. So the standardization of offerings helps you not only administer your business more quickly, it enables you to move more quickly and spread that culture in a consistent fashion. Another thing is with new jurisdictions come new pitfalls. Chelsea, you give this handbook example that's rather extreme, right? But let's take one that comes up literally every day. Let's say you have a certain drug policy written into your handbook, and then you acquire a business in Colorado, a state where weed's been legal for a while, and your existing handbook didn't contemplate that. What are you going to do? You're going to rewrite the handbook over. These are issues that a PEO can work through with you. And in other words, you can get this done faster, because I can assure you, when you're trying to close a deal, I close deals. I do not want to be worried about what's in their handbook, right? We have a lot of other things to do. We have strategic objectives, this kind of thing. Getting it out of our hair is very, very critical, and doing that at a reasonable price. And that's what a PEO offers. I think one point that's largely overlooked by people in our shoes is that your employees, especially your new employees, you're offering them something. And a business that we're talking about, 1 to 7 million, that's acquiring another business, you're likely acquiring a smaller business still. You'll be bringing them resource, extra technology, extra benefits, access to things they may not have had. It's incredibly easy to offer a 401k plan through a PEO. There are some hurdles to doing that on your own if you're a business with 10 people. It'll cost you $10,000 to $20,000 to offer that on your own in some cases. With the PEO, nope, it's just done. You're just there. So those are some general points in acquisition. I'm probably not being as eloquent as I was an hour ago on this, but the bottom line is you'll save time, you'll save money, and you'll focus mind share where it really belongs, which is enhancing the value of the combined entity and really helping the acquisition succeed. That's acquisitions in general. Within the entrepreneurial acquisition model, I want to make a couple of comments, because an acquisition in the abstract is different than exactly what you're contemplating, which is you're going to buy a business and then you're going to run that business, taking over from somebody who was running it for some period of time. Well, that's a leadership change, and that's a disruptive situation under the best of circumstances. Maybe it's disruptive good, it's fresh blood, it's energy. Certainly we're hoping that, right? That those that are going to buy into our idea are going to be wonderful, but it's inherently disruptive. People do not like change, full stop. And bringing more to the table through the PEO relationship and what it offers will counter that disruptive force that's inherent in this transition. You'll be more buttoned up. You'll have programs ready to go. More things will be contemplated, and you're offering the employees more, and that's wonderful. We've already gone over time savings inherent in this. There are fewer things for you to worry about. When you're buying this company, especially if it's your first time doing this, you're going to save time when you need it the most by virtue of having this partner alongside with you to take some of this off of your plate. And then what I would say is, even if there is an existing HR resource inside the organization, you're getting that extra level of support, and it's support to you as the operator, as opposed to support to the HR person to help you through a lot of the decisions you face. I would imagine that there are a lot of things that you might have contemplated on similar conversations around the culture within an organization that you're acquiring and how to navigate some of those things. An outsourced HR partner can help you inside of those things in obvious and non-obvious ways to make you more effective as a leader of your new organization. So ultimately, it's about enabling you to focus on business growth, revenue growth, and keeping these people happy. You know, a lot of times people like to say when they're acquiring a business, or even when they're not, that people are our greatest asset. It's a way to show them. Right, you can show them by investing in this sort of outsourced HR relationship, and it will increase both the magnitude and the likelihood of your success inside of an acquisition.
Yeah, and I think the thing that might be, I guess, different, based on PEO, because it always seems to be, but you have a thought partner, right? So if you sign up with a PEO and you have intentions of growing, you have a thought partner when you're looking at another entity. Right? You have somebody to kind of help that understands the HR intricacies, right? And so when we talk about service team, or the people that kind of the extensions of you, right, of your company, because this like shared employment model, how much service do they provide, right? So if you're looking at an entity and you want to see if the PTO policy lines up to your PTO policy, or if there's challenges with the insurance plans, what kind of support do they provide typically, or not typically?
So you're going to focus along more of the compliance level issues. So you're going to want to, again, this will depend on the PEO, right, in terms of what happens. But looking at the documents, and reviewing the benefits plans for consistency, and helping the right benefits. In our organization, we have both benefits brokerage, which handles the advisory conversations, as well as benefits administration, which handles the ongoing maintenance of the plans. So you can get expert advice about here's what they're facing now, and so on. So you can expect a consulting partner, not a consultant that you're paying hourly rates for, but incorporated in the PEO relationship as someone to guide you through these issues, so you're not alone in the unique challenges that you face in acquiring this entity. So here's our benefits plans, here's what we're looking at, here's what we can do. This is part and parcel to what we do every day in evaluating new business. Is okay, here's where they are, here are some decisions you can make. And little secret sauce, it is very, very common for two things to happen. First, for employers to wildly underinvest in benefits and offer nothing and think that that's going to retain employees in this environment. But less intuitive, you see a whole lot of overinvestment in benefits that you're getting richer you're investing in richer health insurance plans than your population would actually appreciate. And so you're sort of pricing them out or forcing the company to subsidize more. There are alternatives to this that may not have been obvious to you. We can help through that entirety of conversation. And so if you're looking for synergies inside of the acquisition, an outsourced HR partner can help you get there, or the right outsourced HR partner can help you get there. But beyond that, it's also the tackling of getting payroll cycles aligned, just the getting the pipes to connect appropriately, updating handbooks as we've already referred to, and providing expert HR advice. The right partner can help you identify, talk through some potential flight risks, right? You're buying this organization. Who must you hold on to? What can we do to hang in there? Is there comp at market levels? Do you think about a bonus? How is that structured? Obviously, from every question comes more questions because, as Chelsea mentioned, this is complicated. That's why it's important to have a skilled partner by your side in the middle of it.
That's really, really helpful. The other thing to think about for everybody is by doing this, and this is not guaranteed, but based on my experience, by taking these steps and kind of packaging up your house or cleaning house and getting everything in order, it increases your value. Like we've seen, like, when we talk, in the lab, is this multiple fair, right? Like they want this versus this. You're going to be able to get higher multiples when you exit, typically, if you've been working with the PEO because your stuff is in order, right? They know you've been in compliance, because when Jason says that there's a co-employment or shared risk model, it's because if something is to happen, they will be sued too. Right. And so when they say shared risk, that's what they mean. Right. And so it's like, you have to be above board in order for most, we'll say, PEOs to work with you. Right. And so that carries value to buyers. And so working with the PEO is a really good value growth strategy as well. That's how I used to talk about it in the past. The last thing that I had was really a follow-up if nobody else has anything else. So the only other question that I had for you was on a statement that you said earlier. We have a pretty significant population in Texas in our membership base, and you had mentioned that workers' comp isn't required. And so I didn't know that. Shocking, I don't know employment law in every state.
Right.
So if it's not in, this is just my curiosity because we have time and I want to ask. So if I choose not to get workers' compensation insurance as an employer and something were to happen, do they sue me individually?
So obviously, I don't want to get into the full conversation of Texas, workers' comp and safety law. But what I would say is, again, Texas specific. Yeah, you don't have to have it. It's not required by law. Keep in mind what workers' compensation is. I think we all know the basic concept. You get injured at the workplace, you're covered under this program. It's mandated in most states. Some states, it's actually what's called monopolistic coverage, meaning there's one provider and everybody sort of gets the same, base rate and so on. But you have this, and the nuance there is not only does it cover an employee that's injured, but there's no fault or recourse. So in other words, if your employee is injured at the workplace, the workers' comp kicks in. There's a process by which the claim is evaluated and administered and handled, and the employer has no additional liability. That's how it works most places. In Texas, you can say, nope, I'm going to roll the dice. Again, not through most PEO relationships, though some will let you. If you roll the dice, remember, it's no fault. Workers' comp, it's no fault. You roll the dice, it is not no fault. You're being sued. The standard of a lawsuit applies. So you can be held to punitive damages. You can be held to damages well in excess of what the injury would have cost in a workers' context. And there is no practical limit. So I don't know if you can be sued personally or not. That's a little beyond my expertise. But can your business be sued? Absolutely.
I guess that's what I mean is like, so are you basically just opening yourself up for lawsuits in that? Because that's kind of crazy.
Yes. And then the question is workers' comp required for an all remote team? And the answer is yes. And keep in mind, the way the workers' comp is charged is every job has a workers' comp code. And so obviously if you're an office worker, it's an 8810 code. It's very inexpensive because injuries to office workers are like slip and fall or ergonomic conditions or or things that are outside of that extremely rare. So it doesn't cost a lot. I mean, not at all. In contrast, if you are a welder, that rate can be 100 times the rate that's charged for that office worker, sort of depending on the risk of the job. And so this is an issue, and even qualifying for the PEOs workers' compensation master programs, which is they're a large policy. If you do certain types of things, if you I don't think anybody here is buying a coal mine, but if you buy a coal mine, you're probably not going to come on our master workers comp. Likewise, if you're training tigers, or if you're working on the top of skyscrapers, things that are incredibly high risk professions. If you're a defense contractor in combat, things like that, you're not going to be covered by workers' comp carriers. But yes, you do. In remote workers, they need workers' compensation coverage. If they're doing white collar type jobs, or they're sales reps that are traveling, it's not a prohibitive cost to the business at all, but you do need it. And the penalties for not having it are dramatic. So you absolutely do not want to go without it. If anyone wants to get in touch with me, Chelsea, what do you recommend for that?
So you will have a profile on our service provider directory, and they will be able to watch the recording there. They will be able to access any marketing material about Questco, and contact, probably not you directly. I'm not going to put you on there just because I don't want a bunch of people bombarding your email. But I'll have somebody from Questco where if they reach out and request follow-up, that somebody will follow up with them directly. And then just at the bottom, I think there's links for emails and websites and stuff like that.
Sure. Well, I guess in closing, I am such a fan of your entrepreneurial drives, and more specifically, the specific way you're going about it. So smart, and really great group of people, and enjoyed the time today.
No, we appreciate having you. Thank you so much. You've answered a tremendous amount of questions that I wanted answered for our members. So thank you for your time.
Happy to help. Thanks so much.
All right, bye.
Bye.